My name is Sarah Thompson, and I'm 31 years old. 3 weeks ago, I was a dedicated marketing coordinator at Pinnacle Digital Solutions, a mid-sized advertising agency in downtown Seattle. I'd been with the company for 4 years, working my way up from an entry-level assistant to managing major client accounts worth over $2 million annually. I thought I had job security, professional respect, and a clear path for advancement. Then I discovered that my boss, Regional Director Michael Brennan, had been systematically stealing from my paycheck for 8 months. The discovery happened by accident. I was reconciling my personal budget on a Sunday afternoon, trying to figure out why my savings account wasn't growing as quickly as I'd projected, when I noticed something odd about my recent pay stubs. My gross salary was consistent with what I expected, but my take-home pay seemed lower than it should be, even accounting for normal tax withholdings and benefit deductions. At first, I assumed it was a payroll error or a change in tax withholdings that I'd missed. But as I dug deeper into my pay records, comparing current stubs with those from 6 months earlier, I found a disturbing pattern. Starting in January, a new deduction had appeared on my pay stubs. Professional development fee, $347.82 per month. The deduction wasn't large enough to be immediately noticeable, especially since my salary had received a small cost of living increase around the same time. But over 8 months, it totaled almost $2,800. I'd never authorized any professional development fee, and I'd never received any communication about additional deductions being taken from my paycheck. More troubling, I couldn't find any record of professional development services or training programs that would justify such a fee. Monday morning, I went to HR to inquire about the mysterious deduction. "Hi, Jennifer," I said to Jennifer Walsh, Pinnacle's HR manager, as I approached her desk with my pay stubs. "I have a question about a deduction that's been appearing on my paycheck for the past several months." Jennifer looked up from her computer with the politely professional smile she reserved for employee inquiries. "Of course, Sarah. What can I help you clarify?" I showed her the pay stub with the professional development fee highlighted. "This deduction has been taken from my pay since January, but I don't recall authorizing it or receiving any explanation about what it covers." Jennifer examined the pay stub with a puzzled expression. "Professional development fee? That's unusual. Let me check your employee file and see what documentation we have for this deduction." She pulled up my employment records on her computer and scrolled through several screens, her frown deepening as she searched. "Sarah, I'm not seeing any authorization for this deduction in your file. No training enrollments, no professional development agreements, nothing that would justify this fee being withheld from your salary." My stomach dropped. "Jennifer, are you saying this deduction is being taken without proper authorization?" "I'm saying I need to investigate this further," Jennifer replied diplomatically. "Let me contact payroll and see if they have additional documentation that explains this deduction." 20 minutes later, Jennifer called me back to her office with an expression that suggested the news wasn't good. "Sarah, I've spoken with payroll and they're showing that this deduction was authorized by your direct supervisor, Michael Brennan. According to their records, Michael submitted a payroll change form in January requesting that the professional development fee be deducted from your salary. But I never agreed to any professional development fee," I protested. "And I've never received any professional development services that would justify this cost." Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "That's what concerns me. Normally, any payroll deductions beyond standard taxes and benefits require written employee consent. Let me schedule a meeting with Michael to clarify what this fee covers and why it was implemented without your knowledge." "Actually, Jennifer, I'd prefer to speak with Michael directly first. Maybe this is just a misunderstanding that we can resolve quickly." Jennifer nodded, though she still looked troubled. "Of course. But Sarah, please document our conversation today and keep copies of these pay stubs. If this deduction is unauthorized, we'll need to address it immediately and arrange for reimbursement." As I walked back to my desk, my mind was racing with questions and suspicions. Michael Brennan had been my supervisor for 2 years, and while he could be demanding and sometimes difficult to work with, I'd never suspected him of outright theft. But the evidence was clear. Nearly $2,800 had been deducted from my salary without my knowledge or consent, and Michael was apparently responsible for authorizing those deductions. I spent the rest of the morning researching payroll regulations and employee rights, trying to understand what legal protections I had and what steps I should take to address the situation. What I learned was disturbing. Unauthorized payroll deductions could constitute wage theft, a serious violation of labor laws that could result in criminal charges and significant financial penalties for employers. By lunchtime, I'd made a decision. I was going to confront Michael directly about the unauthorized deductions, but I was going to be smart about it. If Michael was stealing from my paycheck, he would probably lie about it when confronted. And if he lied, I wanted evidence. I downloaded a voice recording app on my phone and tested it to make sure it captured clear audio. Then I practiced what I was going to say, trying to strike the right tone, professional but direct. giving Michael the opportunity to explain himself while documenting his response. At 2:30 p.m., I knocked on Michael's office door. "Come in," Michael called from behind his desk, where he was reviewing client proposals with his usual intense focus. Michael Brennan was a man in his mid-40s who had built his career on aggressive sales tactics and what he called results-oriented management. He was respected by upper management for consistently meeting revenue targets, but he was known among the staff for being demanding, manipulative, and quick to take credit for other people's work. "Sarah, what can I do for you?" Michael asked, not looking up from his papers. "Michael, I need to discuss something important with you," I said, discreetly starting the recording app on my phone as I sat down in the chair across from his desk. "Make it quick. I've got a client call in 10 minutes. It's about my paycheck. I've discovered that there's been a deduction taken from my salary for the past 8 months that I never authorized." That got Michael's attention. He looked up from his papers with an expression that was difficult to read. Surprise, annoyance, or possibly guilt. "What kind of deduction?" "It's listed as a professional development fee, $347.82 per month since January. I spoke with HR this morning, and they said you authorized this deduction. I need to understand what this fee covers and why it was implemented without my knowledge." Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more guarded. "Sarah, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I don't recall authorizing any special deductions from your paycheck." The lie was so smooth and immediate that I almost doubted my own research. But I had the pay stubs. I had Jennifer's confirmation that Michael had authorized the deduction, and now I had his denial recorded on my phone. "Michael, HR specifically told me that you submitted a payroll change form requesting this deduction. They have documentation showing your authorization." "Well, if I did authorize something, it would have been for legitimate business purposes," Michael said, his tone becoming defensive. "Maybe it was for training programs or professional development courses that you enrolled in." "I haven't enrolled in any training programs or professional development courses," I said firmly. "And even if I had, I would expect to authorize any payroll deductions myself." Michael's expression hardened. "Sarah, I'm going to need you to be very careful about your tone here. I don't appreciate being accused of impropriety, especially when you're clearly confused about the facts." "I'm not confused about the facts, Michael. I have 8 months of pay stubs showing unauthorized deductions totaling almost $2,800. I have confirmation from HR that you authorized these deductions. What I don't have is any explanation of what these fees are supposed to cover." Michael stood up from his desk, using his height to create an intimidating presence. "Sarah, you're walking into territory that could be very problematic for your employment here. I suggest you drop this line of inquiry before you say something that damages your professional reputation." The threat was clear, and it confirmed my suspicions that Michael was guilty of something more serious than a simple payroll error. An innocent supervisor would have investigated the discrepancy and worked to resolve it. A guilty supervisor would try to intimidate me into silence. "Michael, I'm not trying to damage anyone's professional reputation. I'm simply trying to understand why money is being deducted from my paycheck without my authorization. And I'm telling you that if there are any deductions, they're legitimate and authorized," Michael replied. "Now I have work to do, and I suggest you focus on your own responsibilities instead of making accusations that you can't support." I stood up to leave, knowing that I had recorded exactly what I needed. Michael's denial of authorizing the deductions, his refusal to explain what the fees covered, and his attempt to intimidate me into dropping the matter. "Thank you for your time, Michael," I said politely. "I'll follow up with HR to make sure we get this resolved." "Sarah," Michael said as I reached the door, "I hope you'll think carefully before taking this any further. Pinnacle values team players, not troublemakers." As I closed Michael's office door, I realized that I wasn't just dealing with unauthorized payroll deductions. I was dealing with a supervisor who was willing to lie, intimidate, and threaten employees to cover up his misconduct. But I had something Michael didn't know I had: a recording of our entire conversation, including his denials, his lies, and his attempts to silence me. It was time to take this evidence to HR and see exactly how far Michael's dishonesty extended. The next morning, I arrived at Pinnacle Digital Solutions 30 minutes early, armed with my recorded conversation, detailed pay stub analysis, and a growing suspicion that Michael Brennan's misconduct extended far beyond just my paycheck. I'd spent the evening researching wage theft cases and documenting every interaction I'd had with Michael over the past 8 months, looking for patterns that might explain his behavior. What I'd discovered was troubling. Michael had been increasingly controlling about my work assignments, insisting that all client communications go through him, rather than allowing me to maintain direct relationships with accounts I'd been managing successfully for years. He'd also been taking credit for my project successes during team meetings while publicly criticizing my performance on minor issues. At the time, I'd attributed his behavior to his management style and the pressure he faced to meet departmental targets. Now I wondered if he'd been systematically undermining my confidence and professional relationships to make it easier to steal from my salary without resistance. I knocked on Jennifer Walsh's office door at 8:01 a.m. sharp. "Sarah, come in," Jennifer said, looking up from her computer with an expression that suggested she'd been thinking about our conversation from the previous day. "I was planning to call you this morning. I've done some additional research into your payroll situation, and I have some concerns." "What kind of concerns?" Jennifer gestured for me to sit down and closed her office door, a sign that our conversation was about to become more serious. "Sarah, I've reviewed Michael's payroll authorization forms for the past year, and I've found some irregularities that go beyond just your situation." My stomach tightened. "What kind of irregularities?" "Michael has authorized similar professional development fees for 3 other employees in your department, all without proper documentation or employee consent. The total amount being deducted across all 4 employees is over $1,400 per month. The scope of Michael's theft was larger than I'd imagined." "Jennifer, are you saying Michael has been stealing from multiple employees?" "I'm saying we have a serious payroll discrepancy that requires immediate investigation," Jennifer replied diplomatically. "But yes, the pattern suggests systematic unauthorized deductions that could constitute wage theft." I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. "Jennifer, I need to share something with you. Yesterday, when I confronted Michael about the deductions, I recorded our conversation." Jennifer's eyebrows rose. "You recorded your supervisor?" I suspected he might lie about the deductions, and I wanted evidence of his response. Was I within my rights to record the conversation? Jennifer considered the question carefully. Washington is a 2-party consent state, which means recording conversations without all parties' consent can be problematic. However, if you have evidence of criminal activity, there may be legal protections for whistleblowers. "Jennifer, would you like to hear what Michael said when I asked him about the deductions?" "Yes, but first I need to contact our legal department and possibly law enforcement. If we're dealing with systematic wage theft, this has become a criminal matter that requires proper handling." Jennifer picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Hi, this is Jennifer Walsh in HR. I need to speak with David Rodriguez about a potential wage theft situation." "Yes, it's urgent. Thank you." While we waited for the legal department to respond, Jennifer showed me the payroll records she'd uncovered during her investigation. "Sarah, look at this pattern," Jennifer said, spreading out authorization forms across her desk. Michael submitted payroll change requests for all 4 affected employees within a 6-week period between December and January. All the requests cite professional development fees, and none of them include supporting documentation or employee signatures. I examined the forms, recognizing the pattern Jennifer was describing, and none of these employees were notified about the deductions. I contacted 2 of them yesterday evening. Neither was aware that money was being deducted from their paychecks, and neither had enrolled in any professional development programs that would justify such fees. The evidence was overwhelming. Michael hadn't just stolen from my paycheck. He'd been running a systematic scheme to deduct unauthorized fees from multiple employees, probably hoping that the amounts were small enough to go unnoticed. "Jennifer, where does the money go when it's deducted from our paychecks?" Jennifer's expression darkened. "That's what concerns me most. According to payroll records, the professional development fees are being transferred to an external account that's supposed to be for training services. But when I contacted the vendor listed on the paperwork, they have no record of providing services to Pinnacle or receiving payments from us." The implication was clear. Michael wasn't just authorizing unauthorized deductions, he was directing the stolen money to accounts that he controlled. David Rodriguez from the legal department arrived 20 minutes later, accompanied by Carol Martinez, Pinnacle's chief financial officer. Both looked grim as Jennifer briefed them on the payroll irregularities she'd discovered. "Ms. Thompson," David said after hearing Jennifer's summary, "we understand you have a recording of a conversation with Mr. Brennan about these deductions?" "Yes, I recorded our conversation yesterday when I confronted him about the unauthorized fees." "Before we listen to that recording, I need to explain the legal situation," David said. "Washington state requires 2-party consent for recording conversations, but there are exceptions for documenting criminal activity. If Mr. Brennan has indeed been committing wage theft, your recording could be admissible as evidence." Carol leaned forward with interest. "Ms. Thompson, what exactly did Mr. Brennan say when you asked him about the deductions?" "He denied authorizing them, claimed he didn't know what I was talking about, and then suggested I was confused about the facts. When I pressed him for explanations, he threatened my employment and tried to intimidate me into dropping the matter." David and Carol exchanged glances. "Ms. Thompson, would you be willing to play that recording for us?" I opened the recording app on my phone and hit play. Michael's voice filled Jennifer's office, clear and unmistakable as he denied knowledge of the deductions that HR records showed he had personally authorized. I'm not sure what you're talking about. I don't recall authorizing any special deductions from your paycheck. The recording continued through Michael's increasingly defensive responses, his refusal to explain what the fees covered, and his final threat about my employment security. Sarah, you're walking into territory that could be very problematic for your employment here. I suggest you drop this line of inquiry before you say something that damages your professional reputation. When the recording finished, the room was silent for several long moments. Ms. Thompson, David said finally, this recording documents Mr. Brennan lying about authorizing payroll deductions and attempting to intimidate you for questioning unauthorized charges. Combined with the payroll documentation Jennifer has uncovered, we have clear evidence of systematic wage theft. Carol nodded grimly. David, what's our next step legally? We need to contact law enforcement immediately. Wage theft involving multiple employees and fraudulent vendor accounts could result in felony charges. We also need to secure all payroll records and prevent Mr. Brennan from accessing financial systems. Jennifer looked concerned. What about the other affected employees? Shouldn't they be notified that money has been stolen from their paychecks? Absolutely, Carol replied. And we need to calculate total damages and arrange for immediate reimbursement of all unauthorized deductions, plus interest and penalties. David turned to me with a serious expression. Ms. Thompson, you should understand that this investigation may require you to testify in criminal proceedings against Mr. Brennan. Are you prepared for that level of involvement? I thought about Michael's threats, his attempts to intimidate me, and the realization that he'd been stealing from not just me but multiple coworkers. Yes, I'm prepared to testify. What Michael did was theft, and he shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. There's one more thing we need to investigate, Carol said, consulting notes she'd been taking during our conversation. If Mr. Brennan has been directing stolen funds to external accounts, we need to determine if he's been using company resources to facilitate personal financial gains. Jennifer pulled out another set of documents. Carol, that's something else I discovered during my investigation. The vendor account that's been receiving the professional development fees is registered to MB Consulting Services, a company that appears to be owned by Michael Brennan himself. The room fell silent as the full scope of Michael's scheme became clear. He hadn't just been stealing money from employee paychecks. He'd been funneling that money to his own consulting company, essentially using Pinnacle's payroll system to embezzle funds for personal gain. David, Carol said, we're not just dealing with wage theft. We're dealing with embezzlement, fraud, and possibly money laundering. David nodded gravely. I'm calling the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. This has moved beyond local law enforcement jurisdiction. As the legal and financial implications of Michael's crimes became clear, I realized that my decision to record our conversation had uncovered something much larger than simple payroll errors. Michael Brennan had been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that could result in federal criminal charges and significant prison time. Ms. Thompson, Jennifer said, I want you to know that Pinnacle takes these allegations extremely seriously. You showed courage in coming forward, and we're going to ensure that you and the other affected employees receive full restitution for the theft you've suffered. What happens to Michael? I asked. David and Carol exchanged glances before David answered. Mr. Brennan will be terminated immediately and escorted from the building. His access to all company systems has already been revoked. Criminal charges will be filed, and he'll face federal prosecution for embezzlement and fraud. As I left Jennifer's office, I realized that my simple inquiry about a payroll discrepancy had exposed a criminal enterprise that had been operating under everyone's noses for months. Michael's arrogance and dishonesty had led him to underestimate both my intelligence and my determination to seek justice. But the recording I'd made of our conversation had provided the evidence needed to hold him accountable for crimes that extended far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. The real confrontation was still to come. At 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning, I was sitting in Pinnacle's largest conference room alongside Jennifer Walsh, David Rodriguez, Carol Martinez, and two FBI financial crimes investigators who had arrived an hour earlier to begin their formal investigation into Michael Brennan's embezzlement scheme. Through the glass walls, I could see Michael approaching with his usual confident stride, unaware that his criminal activities had been discovered and documented. Ms. Thompson, said Agent Patricia Collins, the lead FBI investigator, we appreciate your cooperation in this matter. Your recording and the supporting documentation you provided have been crucial in establishing the scope of Mr. Brennan's criminal activity. Agent Collins was a woman in her 40s with the kind of calm, professional demeanor that suggested she'd handled numerous white-collar crime cases. Her partner, Agent Robert Chen, was reviewing financial records on his laptop while preparing the recording equipment that would capture Michael's responses to their questions. Before Mr. Brennan arrives, Agent Collins continued, I want to explain what's going to happen. We're going to present him with the evidence we've gathered and give him an opportunity to explain his actions. His responses will be recorded and may be used in criminal proceedings. David Rodriguez leaned forward. Should we inform Michael that the conversation is being recorded? Absolutely, Agent Collins replied. This is a formal investigation, and Mr. Brennan has the right to know that his statements are being documented. He also has the right to have an attorney present, though most subjects choose to speak with us initially. Jennifer knocked on the conference room door and gestured for Michael to enter. As he walked into the room, I could see his expression change from confidence to confusion as he took in the assembled group of investigators and executives. Michael, Carol Martinez said, please have a seat. We need to discuss some serious concerns that have been raised about financial irregularities in your department. Michael sat down across from the investigators, his eyes darting between faces as he tried to assess the situation. Financial irregularities? I'm not sure what you're referring to. Agent Collins opened her folder and placed several documents on the table. Mr. Brennan, I'm Agent Patricia Collins with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. This is Agent Robert Chen. We're investigating allegations of wage theft and embezzlement at Pinnacle Digital Solutions. The color drained from Michael's face. FBI? There must be some misunderstanding. I haven't done anything that would require federal investigation. Mr. Brennan, Agent Chen said, you have the right to remain silent and the right to have an attorney present during this conversation. Anything you say may be used as evidence in criminal proceedings. Do you understand these rights? Michael looked around the room desperately, his confident facade crumbling as he realized the seriousness of the situation. Yes, I understand, but I think there's been a mistake. What exactly am I being accused of? Agent Collins consulted her notes. You're being investigated for systematic wage theft involving unauthorized payroll deductions from multiple employees, fraudulent vendor payments, and embezzlement of corporate funds through false consulting arrangements. That's ridiculous, Michael stammered. I've never stolen anything from anyone. Mr. Brennan, Jennifer said, placing payroll records on the table. Our investigation has revealed that you authorized professional development fees to be deducted from 4 employees' paychecks without their knowledge or consent. These deductions total over $11,000 over the past 8 months. Michael stared at the payroll records, his mind clearly racing as he tried to formulate a response. Those fees were for legitimate professional development services. All of those employees benefited from training programs that I arranged. What training programs? Carol asked. Various professional development workshops and online courses that helped improve their skills and productivity. Agent Collins leaned forward. Mr. Brennan, we've contacted the vendor listed on your authorization forms. MB Consulting Services has no record of providing any training services to Pinnacle Digital Solutions or to any of the affected employees. Michael's face went pale. There must be some confusion with their record keeping. Mr. Brennan, Agent Chen said, MB Consulting Services is registered to your personal address and lists you as the sole proprietor. You've been directing stolen funds from employee paychecks to your own consulting company. The evidence was overwhelming, and Michael's attempts to explain it away were becoming increasingly desperate. That's a coincidence. There are probably multiple MB consulting companies. Actually, Agent Collins said, there's only one MB Consulting Services registered in Washington State, and corporate records show it was established in December, just 1 month before you began authorizing the payroll deductions. I watched Michael's expression change from denial to panic as he realized that the investigators had documented every aspect of his embezzlement scheme. But Agent Collins wasn't finished. Mr. Brennan, yesterday you had a conversation with Ms. Thompson about these payroll deductions. Would you like to tell us what you said during that conversation? Michael glanced at me with an expression that mixed surprise and anger. I told Sarah that I wasn't aware of any unauthorized deductions and that she was confused about the facts. So you denied authorizing the deductions? Agent Chen asked. I said I didn't recall authorizing any special deductions. Agent Collins smiled slightly. Mr. Brennan, Ms. Thompson recorded your conversation yesterday. Would you like to hear what you actually said? Michael's face went white. She recorded me? Without my permission? Washington state law allows recording conversations when documenting criminal activity, David Rodriguez explained. Ms. Thompson's recording is admissible as evidence of your statements regarding the payroll deductions. Agent Collins nodded to Agent Chen, who started the playback of my recorded conversation with Michael. As Michael's own voice filled the conference room, I watched him realize that his lies and denials had been captured on audio. I'm not sure what you're talking about. I don't recall authorizing any special deductions from your paycheck. The recording continued through Michael's defensive responses, and his attempts to intimidate me into dropping my inquiry. When it reached his final threat, the impact on everyone in the room was visible. Sarah, you're walking into territory that could be very problematic for your employment here. I suggest you drop this line of inquiry before you say something that damages your professional reputation. When the recording ended, the conference room was silent for several long moments. Mr. Brennan, Agent Collins said, this recording documents you denying knowledge of payroll deductions that corporate records show you personally authorized. It also documents you threatening an employee for questioning unauthorized charges to her paycheck. Michael was staring at the table, apparently realizing that his recorded denials had eliminated any possibility of claiming the deductions were mistakes or misunderstandings. Mr. Brennan, Carol Martinez said, you're terminated from Pinnacle Digital Solutions effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and your access to all corporate systems has been revoked. Wait, Michael said desperately. Let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. Agent Chen looked up from his laptop. Mr. Brennan, what does it look like to you? It looks like accounting errors and miscommunications that got blown out of proportion. Agent Collins shook her head. Mr. Brennan, accounting errors don't result in stolen funds being directed to consulting companies that you own. Miscommunications don't result in systematic lies to employees about unauthorized payroll deductions. And intimidation tactics, I added, speaking for the first time since Michael had entered the room, don't result from innocent mistakes. Michael turned to look at me with an expression of rage and desperation. Sarah, you've destroyed my career over a simple misunderstanding. Michael, you destroyed your own career by stealing from your employees and lying about it when confronted, I replied. I simply documented your dishonesty. Agent Collins stood up, signaling that the interview was concluding. Mr. Brennan, you're being charged with multiple counts of wage theft, embezzlement, and fraud. You'll receive formal notification of the charges and court dates through your attorney. How much trouble am I in? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Agent Chen consulted his notes. Federal embezzlement charges involving amounts over $10,000 carry potential sentences of up to 10 years in prison and substantial financial penalties. As security escorted Michael from the conference room, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that his crimes had been exposed and that he would face consequences for his actions. Sadness that someone I'd worked with for 2 years had been systematically stealing from his own employees while threatening anyone who questioned his behavior. Ms. Thompson, Agent Collins said as the investigators prepared to leave, your decision to record that conversation and bring these issues to light has prevented Mr. Brennan from continuing his criminal activity and has provided crucial evidence for prosecution. What happens next? I asked. We'll complete our investigation over the next few weeks, Agent Collins replied. You may be called to testify in criminal proceedings, but your cooperation has already provided most of the evidence we need for a successful prosecution. Jennifer Walsh approached me as the room cleared. Sarah, I want you to know that Pinnacle will be implementing new oversight procedures to prevent similar situations in the future, and all affected employees will receive full restitution for stolen wages, plus interest and compensation for the time and stress this situation has caused. As I returned to my desk, I realized that my simple inquiry about a payroll discrepancy had exposed a criminal enterprise and led to federal charges against my former supervisor. Michael's arrogance and dishonesty had made him careless about covering his tracks, and his attempt to intimidate me into silence had provided the recorded evidence that sealed his fate. The recording I'd made had captured not just his lies about the unauthorized deductions, but his character and his willingness to threaten employees who questioned his actions. Sometimes the best way to confront workplace abuse is to document it carefully and let the evidence speak for itself. 2 weeks after Michael Brennan's termination and arrest, the FBI's investigation had expanded far beyond the payroll fraud I'd initially discovered. Agent Patricia Collins had called me into a follow-up meeting to discuss additional evidence that had emerged during their examination of Michael's financial records and computer files. Ms. Thompson, Agent Collins said as I sat down in the FBI field office conference room, our investigation has revealed that Mr. Brennan's criminal activity was much more extensive than the wage theft you originally reported. Agent Chen opened a laptop and showed me financial records that painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning multiple years. We've traced over $127,000 in fraudulent transactions that Mr. Brennan orchestrated through various schemes involving false vendor accounts, inflated expense reports, and unauthorized consulting contracts. The scope of Michael's criminal enterprise was staggering. What had started as my discovery of unauthorized payroll deductions had uncovered a complex web of embezzlement that had been operating under Pinnacle's management noses for over 3 years. How did he manage to steal that much money without being detected? I asked. sophisticated schemes, and careful manipulation of oversight systems, Agent Collins explained. Mr. Brennan exploited his position as regional director to authorize payments, approve expense reports, and establish vendor relationships without adequate independent verification. Agent Chen showed me documents that illustrated Michael's methods. He created multiple fictitious consulting companies, submitted false expense reports for business travel that never occurred, and authorized payments for services that were never provided. But how does my recorded conversation fit into this larger investigation? Your recording was crucial, Agent Collins said, because it established Mr. Brennan's pattern of lying and intimidation when confronted with evidence of his crimes. It demonstrated his consciousness of guilt and his willingness to threaten employees who questioned his actions. The agents showed me additional evidence they'd gathered from Michael's computer files, including email correspondence that revealed his awareness of the illegal nature of his activities. This email from 6 months ago is particularly damning, Agent Chen said, pointing to a message Michael had sent to himself as an apparent reminder. It says, "Need to be more careful about payroll deductions. Sarah is asking questions about her pay stub. Consider spacing out the deductions more to avoid detection." The email proved that Michael had been aware that his payroll scheme was illegal and had been actively trying to avoid detection. It also showed that he'd specifically identified me as a threat to his criminal activities months before I'd actually discovered the unauthorized deductions. Agent Collins, does this mean Michael had been planning to target me specifically? It appears that Mr. Brennan viewed you as a potential problem because of your attention to detail and your direct communication style, Agent Collins replied. Several other emails indicate that he was concerned about employees who might question financial irregularities. Agent Chen pulled up another document. This is particularly interesting. Mr. Brennan sent an email to himself 2 weeks before your confrontation that says, "If Sarah discovers the payroll issue, deny everything and threaten her job security. She's too junior to push back effectively." The calculation behind Michael's response to my inquiry was chilling. He hadn't just lied spontaneously when I questioned him. He'd planned his denials and intimidation tactics in advance, apparently believing that his position of authority would protect him from accountability. So when I recorded our conversation, I was actually documenting behavior that he had premeditated? Exactly, Agent Collins confirmed. Your recording captured Mr. Brennan implementing a strategy he had planned specifically to cover up his crimes and silence employee complaints. The agents showed me additional evidence of Michael's manipulation tactics, including emails where he'd criticized my work performance to other managers in what appeared to be a preemptive effort to undermine my credibility. This email chain from 3 months ago shows Mr. Brennan telling upper management that you were struggling with attention to detail and showing signs of paranoia about routine business processes, Agent Chen explained. I felt sick reading Michael's words. He'd been systematically attacking my professional reputation while simultaneously stealing from my paycheck, apparently preparing for the possibility that I might eventually question his actions. He was trying to discredit me before I even knew there was anything to investigate, I said. It's a common tactic among white-collar criminals, Agent Collins noted. They undermine potential whistleblowers preemptively to make their eventual accusations seem less credible. The agents then showed me the most disturbing discovery of their investigation: evidence that Michael had been targeting specific employees for his schemes based on their perceived vulnerability to intimidation. Mr. Brennan kept detailed notes about his employees' personal financial situations, family circumstances, and career ambitions, Agent Chen said, showing me a spreadsheet that Michael had maintained on his personal computer. The spreadsheet was organized like a database, with columns for employee names, salary information, personal vulnerabilities, and what Michael had labeled compliance likelihood. Apparently his assessment of how likely each employee was to question or report suspicious activities. My name was on the list with the notation: high performer, financially motivated, but junior level, unlikely to challenge authority, good candidate for payroll adjustments. He was essentially profiling employees to identify the best targets for his theft, I said, horrified by the calculated nature of his crimes. That's exactly right, Agent Collins confirmed. Mr. Brennan wasn't just stealing opportunistically, he was systematically selecting victims based on his assessment of their ability to resist or report his crimes. The spreadsheet showed that Michael had stolen from 7 different employees over 3 years, with amounts ranging from $200 to $500 per month depending on what he thought each person could afford to lose without noticing. The other victims include Jennifer Martinez in accounting, David Park in client services, and Lisa Rodriguez in creative services, Agent Chen explained. None of them realized they were being targeted until we contacted them during our investigation. I thought about my colleagues, wondering how many late nights they'd worked to make up for the money that Michael had been stealing from their paychecks. How many sacrifices they'd made to balance budgets that were artificially tight because of his theft. Agent Collins, what's going to happen to Michael now? Mr. Brennan has been indicted on 14 federal charges, including embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, she replied. He's facing a potential sentence of 25 to 30 years in federal prison. 25 years? The charges are serious, and the amounts involved qualify as felony-level offenses, Agent Chen explained. Additionally, the systematic nature of his crimes and his attempts to intimidate witnesses have resulted in enhanced charges. Agent Collins pulled out another document. There's something else you should know, Ms. Thompson. Mr. Brennan's attorney has approached the prosecutor about a potential plea agreement. What kind of plea agreement? He's offered to plead guilty to the financial crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he's claiming that his treatment of employees was just aggressive management style rather than criminal intimidation. I felt my anger rising. Even when facing decades in prison, Michael was still trying to minimize his abuse of his employees and avoid accountability for his intimidation tactics. Agent Collins, what impact would a plea agreement have on the case? If Mr. Brennan pleads guilty to the financial crimes, it would save the expense and time of a trial on those charges. However, the intimidation and retaliation charges could still proceed separately. Agent Chen leaned forward. Ms. Thompson, your recorded conversation is crucial evidence for the intimidation charges. Even if Mr. Brennan pleads guilty to embezzlement, prosecutors want to pursue the employee intimidation charges to set a precedent about workplace retaliation. What would that mean for me? You would likely be called to testify about Mr. Brennan's attempts to threaten and silence you, Agent Collins explained. Your recording would be played in court, and you'd be asked to explain the context and impact of his intimidation. The prospect of testifying in federal court was daunting, but I realized it was necessary to ensure that Michael faced consequences for all of his crimes, not just the financial ones. I'm willing to testify, I said. Michael's intimidation tactics were just as damaging as his theft, and other employees deserve to know that workplace retaliation has serious consequences. Agent Collins smiled approvingly. Ms. Thompson, your courage in recording that conversation and reporting these crimes has been instrumental in exposing a criminal enterprise that could have continued for years. What happens to the money that Michael stole? All victims will receive full restitution as part of the criminal proceedings, Agent Chen said. Additionally, you and the other affected employees may have grounds for civil lawsuits seeking additional damages for the stress and harm caused by his crimes. As I left the FBI field office, I reflected on how drastically my life had changed since that Sunday afternoon when I'd discovered the unauthorized deductions on my pay stub. What had started as a simple budget reconciliation had uncovered a sophisticated criminal enterprise and led to federal charges against my former supervisor. The recording I'd made of our confrontation had captured not just Michael's lies about the payroll fraud, but his calculated strategy for intimidating employees and covering up his crimes. It had provided prosecutors with evidence of his consciousness of guilt and his willingness to abuse his authority to silence potential whistleblowers. 3 days later, I received a call from Jennifer Walsh at Pinnacle with news about the company's response to the investigation. Sarah, I wanted to update you on the changes we're implementing as a result of this situation, Jennifer said. Pinnacle is establishing new oversight procedures for payroll authorization, mandatory ethics training for all managers, and an anonymous reporting system for employees to report financial irregularities. That sounds comprehensive, I said. There's something else, Jennifer continued. The executive team has decided to offer you Michael's former position as a regional director. Your integrity and courage in exposing this situation have demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need. The promotion offer was unexpected but gratifying. I would be taking over the department that Michael had used to facilitate his crimes, with the opportunity to rebuild trust and implement ethical management practices. Jennifer, I'm honored by the offer. I'd like to accept the position. Excellent. Your first responsibility will be working with HR and legal to ensure that all affected employees receive full support and that we prevent similar situations in the future. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my decision to record that confrontation with Michael had not only exposed his crimes, but had also positioned me for career advancement based on the integrity and courage I'd demonstrated during the investigation. Michael had tried to silence me with threats and intimidation, believing that his authority would protect him from accountability. Instead, his recorded threats had provided the evidence needed to expose his criminal enterprise and hold him responsible for years of theft and abuse. Sometimes the best way to confront workplace criminals is to document their crimes carefully and let justice take its course. 6 months after I'd first discovered the unauthorized deductions on my paycheck, I was sitting in federal district court in Seattle, preparing to testify in the criminal trial of Michael Brennan. Despite his attorney's attempts to negotiate a plea agreement, prosecutors had decided to pursue all charges, including the employee intimidation counts that were based largely on the recording I'd made of our confrontation. The courtroom was packed with Pinnacle employees, FBI agents, and journalists, covering what had become one of the most significant white-collar crime cases in Washington state history. Michael sat at the defendant's table, looking pale and defeated, a stark contrast to the confident supervisor who had tried to intimidate me into silence just months earlier. "Ms. Thompson," said Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez as I took the witness stand, "please tell the court about your discovery of unauthorized payroll deductions and your subsequent conversation with the defendant." I had practiced my testimony extensively with the prosecutors, but actually facing Michael in court while recounting his crimes was more emotional than I'd expected. As I described finding the mysterious deductions and my initial meeting with HR, I could see Michael staring at me with an expression that mixed anger and desperation. "Ms. Thompson, what was your purpose in recording your conversation with Mr. Brennan?" "I suspected that he might lie about the deductions when confronted," I replied, "and I wanted evidence of his response in case the situation required further investigation." "Please describe Mr. Brennan's reaction when you questioned him about the unauthorized payroll deductions." I recounted Michael's immediate denials, his refusal to explain what the fees covered, and his escalating attempts to intimidate me into dropping my inquiry. The courtroom was completely silent as I described his threats about my employment security and his suggestion that I was damaging my professional reputation by asking questions. "Ms. Thompson, did you feel threatened by Mr. Brennan's response?" "Yes, absolutely. He was using his position of authority to try to silence me rather than address my legitimate questions about unauthorized charges to my paycheck." The prosecutor nodded. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to play the recording of this conversation for the court." Michael's defense attorney objected, arguing that the recording had been made without his client's consent, but Judge Patricia Williams ruled that the recording was admissible under Washington's whistleblower protection statutes. As my phone conversation with Michael played through the courtroom's sound system, I watched the jury's faces carefully. Their expressions grew increasingly disapproving as they heard Michael's lies and threats, particularly his final warning about the consequences of continuing my inquiry. "Sarah, you're walking into territory that could be very problematic for your employment here. I suggest you drop this line of inquiry before you say something that damages your professional reputation." When the recording ended, the prosecutor continued her questioning. "Ms. Thompson, how did Mr. Brennan's response affect your willingness to pursue the matter further?" "It convinced me that he was guilty of something serious," I replied. "An innocent supervisor would have investigated the discrepancy and worked to resolve it." Michael's immediate denials and intimidation tactics proved that he was trying to cover up criminal activity. "What impact did this experience have on you personally and professionally?" I thought carefully about how to answer that question. Personally, it was devastating to discover that someone I'd trusted and worked with for years had been stealing from me and my colleagues. Professionally, it taught me the importance of standing up for what's right, even when facing intimidation from people in positions of authority. The prosecutor's questioning continued for another hour, covering the details of the FBI investigation, the evidence of systematic embezzlement, and the impact on all the affected employees. Michael's defense attorney attempted to portray his client's actions as accounting errors and management miscommunications, but the recorded evidence and financial documentation made such explanations impossible to believe. The most powerful moment came when other affected employees testified about the impact of Michael's theft on their lives and families. Jennifer Martinez from accounting described working extra shifts to make ends meet while Michael was stealing $400 per month from her paycheck. David Park from client services talked about the stress of believing he was financially irresponsible when his budget never seemed to balance despite careful planning. "Mr. Brennan didn't just steal money," Jennifer testified. "He stole our peace of mind and made us doubt our own financial management abilities." The prosecution's case was devastating and comprehensive. Beyond the payroll fraud, they presented evidence of Michael's fake consulting companies, fraudulent expense reports, and systematic embezzlement totaling over $180,000 across 4 years. Agent Patricia Collins testified about the sophisticated nature of Michael's schemes and his deliberate targeting of employees he perceived as vulnerable to intimidation. Mr. Brennan maintained detailed profiles of his employees' financial situations and personality traits, Agent Collins explained. He used this information to select victims and to predict their likely responses to his criminal activity. The defense's case was weak and unconvincing. Michael's attorney argued that his client was a dedicated employee who had made some accounting errors that had been misinterpreted as criminal activity. But the recorded evidence of his lies and threats, combined with the financial documentation of his schemes, made such arguments appear desperate. Michael himself chose not to testify, apparently recognizing that anything he said could only make his situation worse. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 14 counts. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later, and Michael was remanded to federal custody pending the hearing. As I left the courthouse, I was approached by several journalists and legal experts who wanted to comment on the case and its implications for workplace crime prevention. Ms. Thompson, said legal analyst David Rodriguez from Seattle Business Journal, "Your decision to record that conversation has been cited as a model for how employees should document workplace misconduct. What advice would you give to other workers facing similar situations?" "Document everything," I replied. "Keep detailed records of suspicious activities, and don't let anyone intimidate you into staying silent about potential crimes." The recording I made provided crucial evidence, but it wouldn't have mattered if I hadn't also been willing to report the situation to appropriate authorities. The sentencing hearing 6 weeks later was surprisingly emotional. Michael's family members pleaded for leniency, describing him as a good father and husband who had made terrible mistakes. His attorney argued for a reduced sentence based on his client's cooperation with the investigation and his acceptance of responsibility, but prosecutors emphasized the systematic nature of his crimes and the impact on his victims. They played portions of my recorded conversation again, highlighting Michael's calculated attempts to intimidate and silence employees who questioned his actions. Mr. Brennan's crimes weren't the result of poor judgment or desperate circumstances, prosecutor Rebecca Martinez argued. They were the product of a deliberate strategy to exploit his position of authority for personal financial gain while abusing employees who trusted him. Judge Williams agreed. She sentenced Michael to 18 years in federal prison, ordered him to pay $245,000 in restitution to his victims, and imposed a $50,000 fine. "Mr. Brennan," Judge Williams said during sentencing, "your crimes represent a profound betrayal of trust that went far beyond simple theft. You exploited your position to steal from employees and then attempted to intimidate those who questioned your actions. Such behavior undermines the foundation of workplace trust and requires severe consequences." The judge specifically mentioned my recorded conversation as evidence of Michael's awareness of his criminal activity and his willingness to abuse his authority to cover up his crimes. Ms. Thompson's courage in documenting and reporting these crimes prevented further victimization and ensured that justice could be served, Judge Williams noted. 1 year after Michael's sentencing, my life had changed dramatically. As regional director at Pinnacle, I had implemented new oversight procedures, ethics training programs, and employee protection policies that prevented the kind of systematic abuse that Michael had perpetrated. The company had thrived under the new management approach, with employee satisfaction scores reaching all-time highs and client retention improving significantly. Several other companies had hired me as a consultant to help them develop similar anti-fraud and employee protection systems. "Sarah, what you did has become a case study in business schools and law enforcement training programs," Jennifer Walsh told me during my annual performance review. "Your courage in exposing workplace crime has had impact far beyond just our company." The civil lawsuit against Michael had resulted in additional compensation for all affected employees, and the settlement had funded a scholarship program for workers seeking education about their legal rights and workplace protections. Most satisfying was the feedback I received from other employees who had been inspired by my experience to report workplace misconduct in their own organizations. "Your story gave me the courage to document and report sexual harassment by my supervisor," one woman wrote. "Knowing that recording conversations about illegal activities was legally protected helped me gather the evidence needed to stop his behavior. I used your approach to expose a manager who was stealing overtime pay from hourly workers," wrote another. "The recording I made of his denials led to his termination and criminal charges." The recording I had made of my confrontation with Michael had become more than just evidence in a criminal case. It had become a symbol of the power that employees have to document and expose workplace crimes when they have the courage to speak up. Michael Brennan was serving his sentence in federal prison, having lost his career, his reputation, and his freedom because of his decision to steal from employees and intimidate anyone who questioned his actions. My decision to hit record before confronting him had captured not just his lies and denials, but his character and his willingness to abuse his authority to protect his criminal enterprise. Sometimes the most powerful tool against workplace abuse is simply a smartphone, and the courage to use it when facing down a bully who thinks their position protects them from accountability. The recording had given me justice, protected other employees from future victimization, and provided a roadmap for workers facing similar situations. And it had proven that sometimes the best way to confront a criminal is to let them convict themselves with their own recorded words.